Hello and welcome to Community Thinkers, a broadcast mini-series from the Summit Hill Association. Thanks for joining us. In this series, we hear from one of St. Paul's most thoughtful people about issues that matter to our neighbors here in Summit Hill and in St. Paul. I'm Sherry Johnson. I'm a process guide, inclusion trainer, and complexity coach. I'm also a board member here at Summit Hill Association.
And I'm Monica Haas. I'm the executive director of the Summit Hill Association, and I am your go-to gal for information about Summit Hill. What is Community Thinkers? What are we doing here? Well, we're here hosting this series to engage our community as we renew our neighborhood plan. We're finding out that the more we learn about planning, sustainability, racial equity, and economic development, the more we realize how much more there is to learn.
And this show is for you. So after I get things started with our guest, we'll turn to the chat where Monica will share your questions with our guest. Before we learn from today's community thinker, we invite you to comment anytime and ask questions in the thread below. We'd even love to know just what brought you here today and what your interest in the topic is. We love to see it. So the community thinker we've asked to join us today is Wendy Underwood. She's a St. Paul Planning Commissioner and serves as Vice President for Social Justice Advocacy and Engagement at Catholic Charities of St. Paul in Minneapolis. We'll talk about how the Planning Commission works, as well as hear more generally about neighborhood plans in St. Paul. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. This is a real privilege. Thank you.
Yeah, it's exciting to talk with you, especially right now. Lots is happening. So we'd love to hear, tell us about your personal history with Summit Hill and Grand Avenue or neighborhoods like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like a lot of young people moving to Minnesota, Grand Avenue was my very first home and directly across the street from Dixie's, in fact, 696 Grand. And I was coming from a really rough neighborhood in Washington, D.C., and wanted to be somewhere I felt safe and that I could be out at night and that I could, frankly, invite my parents to from central Wyoming. And the market was just like it is today. Rents were really high. There was hardly anywhere to live. And I was really, really lucky to find what I could afford. And it was a tiny apartment with a enclosed front screen porch that taught me how to live in St. Paul and in Minnesota. And I've actually never lived more than about a mile from that apartment in the 20 years I've been here since. I did eventually leave there, and the first home I owned was in the Summit U neighborhood, where I was privileged to be on that district council for a few years, particularly in the early years of the Green Line. It was a great time to be on that board. And I now very proudly live in the West 7th neighborhood, just straight down St. Clair from Summit Hill's offices. And actually, Tuesday night at our annual meeting is my last meeting as a member of the Fort Road Federation board. So to say district councils and the importance of our community infrastructure in St. Paul is important to me, I would be a casual way to describe it, for sure. So yeah. Thank you, Sherry, for giving your time to this work. It means a lot.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Your story reminds me that we're constantly reminded just how much naturally occurring affordable housing there is in this neighborhood, in District 16, and even especially along Grand Avenue. So yeah. Anyway, so as we're working on updating our neighborhood plan here at Summit Hill, what would you say is likely to be the easiest part for us and maybe the hardest part for us?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I would say the easiest part is in the interest of it. I mean, it's in the brainstorming, the early fun conversations, the now modern digital whiteboards and the ideas and all of that, and just really pushing that creative thought. I would say, candidly, the hardest part is finishing it. It's making some of those tough choices. It's getting through the wordsmithing, to really make sure the words convey what the district council is trying to say. And so that I've thought about a few tips I would suggest into helping navigate those harder parts. And the best thing that you can do is to be really consistent. You have, great committee leadership now, which is super important. And I just really recommend sticking to really consistent meeting schedule, like bi-weekly meetings, to really tackle each section of the plan and really help hold people accountable. And then have consistent standing updates at the board, again, with that accountability and getting input and feedback so that the work can continue going. If someone has to leave the board, which certainly happens, we're all volunteers, then immediately having that backfill, or having enough people involved in the work that someone can step in a leadership role. I've definitely experienced that challenge before, of the head of the planning moving. And so having enough people involved to take care of that, and having enough discipline to really get it over the finish line. I also really recommend great visuals. It can be easier to point to what you're talking about when you can see it, versus the words. And it makes your plan dynamic and interesting. And then I really encourage it to be strong. I mean, be bold. This is your neighborhood plan, and it's your record of what you hope for it in the future. And that's, you get to do that and give it to the city, and then they have it as a position of record. And I would also just say, I said that the hardest thing to do is to finish it, but my strong advice is to finish it, because the world is changing quickly around us, and you want decisions made right now looking at the neighborhood going forward, not at looking at ideas 10 and 15 years past. So that's but when it's done, it feels so great, and then you get to share it with a lot of people, and it's well worth it.
I'm imagining that day with great fervor. So my understanding is that you actually have a presentation in answer to this question, which is essentially, so yeah, that's what a neighborhood plan does, and that's what district councils do. But what does the Planning Commission do in shaping St. Paul? So I think Monica's going to drop me off screen for a minute here.
Okay. And I'm just going to work on sharing my screen. So just ask for that technology patience. Okay. Well, what I can see, I would suggest that you can see my screen. So I'll just go ahead and fantastic. So this is just really brief, and I borrowed this from our planning director, Luis Piera, which we used with presentations before district councils coming on a couple of years ago. It's been harder to do that with COVID. So some of the data is a little old, but the idea is the same. And I just have a couple of slides. So I was asked to share, what is the role of the Planning Commission? And I just think it's important to recognize in St. Paul, our goal with planning is to maximize the health, safety, and economic well-being of all the people in our city, and to provide a community vision for today and going into the future. And this crosses all modes, across community, parks and rec, businesses, and supportive services, and how people can live their best life and most successfully in St. Paul. So in our work is largely focused around land use, in district council all the time. It's interests and issues regarding single family or multifamily housing units. It's commercial, industrial, mixed use types of properties, institutional, which we have a lot of in St. Paul. I mean, that's land use and questions of land use. And then there's zoning, which is complicated, and it's why we have things like city planners and the Planning Commission, and land use committees on district councils to dig into those weeds. But zoning is that system of land use regulation based on zones and rules passed by city council and approved by the mayor. And every single parcel of anything has a zone. Most folks, if you have a single family residence, you're in a single family residential zone, for example. And then zoning there can be requests for conditional use permits. There can be requests for variances on the zoning. It can get complicated, but it's there for a reason, to be able to make sure needs are being met, laws are being met, etc. And so then I'm here today as a St. Paul Planning Commissioner. We're a large commission. It's 21 members of the city of St. Paul. Mayor Carter's administration works really hard to appoint an equitable number of people across the city. So an effort to have 3 people from each of our 7 city wards. And our role is to advise the city on planning matters. So things like your neighborhood plan will come to us first and will be reviewed.
Hi, we're back. We lost the feed. This stinks. So we're going to wait and see if Wendy comes back in the next minute or so. Sometimes the internet gods are not kind, and today seems to be one of those days. So when we do share back this video on our stream, we will probably cut out this part for those of you who want to share this video. But we should get Wendy back at any time. So Monica, do you see her down there in the stream yet?
I do not.
Rats.
Do not.
I also had my computer crazily restart the other day. Oh, do I need to log off and log back on? Probably. Looks like she was actually still here somewhere in the ether.
I have her picture and everything left.
This is so weird.
Here she comes.
Yes.
Hey, I didn't know I had dropped off. So
we are live, Wendy. Welcome back. Do you want to try and share your screen again? And we were right in the middle of that slide where you were talking about further talking about the role of the Planning Commission. It was kind of
and that's when it lost.
Yeah.
I can try, because I do want to speak to the importance of our equity work on Planning Commission, and then that role of the neighborhood plan. So I'll try to be quick, but
that's great. Let's do it.
To watch. I'll look at the chat too to see if I've fallen off again.
Yeah, okay. And by the way, no sweat. When we reshare this conversation, like the live video, we're going to cut this part, just so you know. Hi, live viewers. We're back. Okay, you can drop me off, Monica.
Okay, thanks. Okay, great. I had mentioned earlier this data is a little old, but I still wanted to use it to point out, a huge focus for us on the Planning Commission is equity work across the city. And I just think it's really important to recognize that St. Paul has the 4th highest population of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We're more than Minneapolis. And at the same time, our in BIPOC per capita income is significantly less than white people in St. Paul, and the housing cost burdens are significantly greater. These are things that we talk about a lot in our planning decisions. We also talk a lot about equitable investments. and really making sure we're aware of the resources across St. Paul and where they are not. And so in prioritizing where city work is being done. I sit on the transportation committee, and we talk about making sure potholes are repaired on where they're most needed, not on where they get the most phone calls. That it's really making sure that we're approaching things, all work across the city through an equity lens. And to that end, the Met Council does have an equitable development scorecard, which district councils use. Wesco has made their own equity scorecard that is fantastic, and we got to work on at Planning Commission. But there are resources out there for district councils and neighborhood groups to use to make sure that plans and priorities are equity driven. So just a note about district councils, if you're not terribly familiar, we have 17 across St. Paul, which is amazing. And these groups advise to the city on physical, economic, and social development issues, things that really align with the citywide mayoral appointed planning commission. And I'll tell you, as a planning commissioner, I rely heavily on how neighborhoods and district councils respond to issues before planning commissioners. Neighborhood plans, I know Summit Hill is in the midst of this work, and just to reiterate that these plans are forward thinking. It's about where you want to see the direction of your community going in the future. It's a way to engage a lot of different neighbors who maybe aren't interested in the district council, but want to weigh in on the look and feel of the neighborhood. I also use a couple different examples here. Frogtown's neighborhood area plan is a comic book design to help get younger people and new people interested in the work. And then District 1 recently finished a beautiful, straightforward plan. I mean, there's lots of ways that it can be done. But like I said before, I strongly recommend pictures. And then the purpose of this neighborhood plan is a 10-year vision and priorities that will assist in developing the 10-year St. Paul comprehensive plan. And I'll tell you, it's something people can hold on to say, this is what the neighborhood wants, or this is not what the neighborhood wants, which is why it's important to really keep it up to date, because the world around us changes. And then who uses these plans, right? So, so definitely private interests who are looking to develop or redevelop, and if their ideas are going to fit with the neighborhood. For sure, the City of St. Paul and our local government partners, Metro Transit and Met Council, for sure. And then ourselves, district councils, volunteers, people who are interested in the direction of the neighborhood and are supporting something or are opposing something and want to know how the neighborhood has gone on record on an issue. So that was real quick. I'm going to stop sharing right now. And I know Sherry had a couple more questions.
Yes, I'm back. Thanks, Monica. Monica will be back with us in a sec too. So as I'm listening to all that, I'm realizing there's so many layers of decision-making that you need to make on the Planning Commission. And, you know, between the neighborhood plans, the 2040 plan of St. Paul, but also the fact that the existing laws and regulations don't necessarily match up with those plans either way. So what values do you weigh when you consider different votes on the commission? Like, what's your personal process?
Yeah, well, it can be really tricky when there may be something you want, but the zoning and the code and what you have to, what the parameters of your decisions might be different, and that is definitely something that we are working on together at Planning Commission right now, in fact, is how to be advancing the policy issues very, very important to us as a commission that have not moved forward at the city level. Just this morning at Planning Commission was discussion about something we don't normally do, but sending a letter to the mayor and others, asking them to prioritize studies on inclusionary zoning because we're desperately seeking progressive requirements in our housing developments, and so we were flat out asking for it, and instead of just not having it and sitting frustrated during difficult votes. So,
can you say more about inclusionary zoning? What does that mean?
Oh gosh, like I know what it means in my head, but so that recognizes that it's an equitable housing policy that housing developments are required to provide so many apartments for individuals and families at varying income levels. And it's not a new idea. Other cities have this. The city of Minneapolis is taking a different tact with it, but it basically like helps ensure that all people have an opportunity to live everywhere in St. Paul. And we desperately need it, not just because of our low housing stock, but because of our great disparities in how much people pay for housing, and where people want to and should be able to live. So that's a pretty simple explanation of it. Yeah. I was going to also say, when it comes to like how I make decisions on Planning Commission, and I mentioned it earlier in the presentation, but I take I am not on a zoning committee or the Comprehensive Neighborhood Planning Committee. I chair the Communications and Nominations Committee, and I'm on transportation. So when I get the thick zoning packets, if you will, for full board, I go right to what is the district council's position, and what was the testimony and letters for and against the proposal, and then I look at the staff recommendations. I mean, the St. Paul City team is always starting from the most positive place of intent, and so their recommendations and findings are really important. And then what did my peers, how did my peers vote? And then I digest that and then look forward to the conversation at the full commission to understand the picture, to decide. But I lead with, what did the district council say, and what did people in the neighborhood say? And sometimes I know that those maybe the opportunity it doesn't happen. The district council learns about it late, or neighbors aren't aware of it's happening, and those are really, really frustrating situations. I feel like those happen less and less, and I hope so. But if that information isn't made to me as a commissioner, I will ask. I will just say, what did the district council say, or whatever. So those things are really important, I would say.
That's really enlightening. Thank you for sharing that with us. So this is a question we ask all of our guests. If you could snap your fingers and have your wish be granted, what do you wish everyone understood about planning?
Yeah, I just mentioned it earlier, but the work all truly comes from a positive place of intent. An individual person's intention might be different from the person next to them, but it's all positive, and it's all for the greater good. I feel like it is really worth following along, because it does impact you, and it impacts the people around you, and it's when you get past the complicated words. I have a degree in Russian studies, and my trick is like, you know the first two letters of a person's name, and then you move on. You're like, okay, that character, right? Well, so I kind of do the same in zoning, and I'm like, okay, this, and But it's such it is the way that that we get to participate without an election certificate to ensure we are building an equitable, beautiful, wonderful place to live. And St. Paul has one of the most robust systems in the country. And so the fact that we're regularly encouraged to participate in it is just a really great thing. And the people, you get the neighbors and the people you get to meet and things you get to learn is just so rewarding too.
That is very true. Well, hey, it's time to look at questions from our listeners. Monica, come in and join us. What are you seeing folks want to learn or share?
Yes, we'll start with Megan Thomas has asked, do any plans incorporate how to respond to unexpected discovered archaeology during projects?
Hi, Megan. That's a really interesting question, and I could see how that could happen in some spots in St. Paul. And Megan might even have experience with that with where she lives, but I don't know. I would certainly think things pause. I mean, in my world with planning and zoning, it doesn't run on a calendar. I mean, there's processes and steps have to happen one before the other, but after that, the calendar aspect and when can a project stop, I don't know. I've understood the question, but an interesting question.
Thanks. Mary Karen would like to know, does the commission recognize the historic Summit Avenue corridor as a valuable asset that is due or as an area that is due for rezoning and density?
Really interesting question. And I think, I would say the Planning Commission would look at that instead as a what would staff and Summit Hill and Summit U come forward with saying. I live on West 7th, and we have recently undergone through requests from the neighborhood up to the city, and then kicked off by Planning Commission, we've undergone parking studies. That's a big one, and different type we went through a big the whole city went through a big change in residential parking passes, right? Which came from like combined desires of neighborhoods, district councils saying this is so confusing and it hasn't been addressed in 20 years, and city staff saying like we haven't looked at this in 20 years, we need to update it. And so something like historic Summit Avenue and interest about rezoning. I guess West 7th went from St. Clair to downtown, went through a big rezoning effort too recently. That was the other thing. There also was a big one recently along Marshall, right, like headed west. It really, a lot of it can come from the neighborhood. It can come from the council member. It can come from the city staff saying like we haven't looked at this in a long time. So I would just say your neighborhood plan needs to speak to it. If it's something that hasn't been brought to the table, then that's the place to do it, because you want your voice in that before someone else comes and says, we really need to look at this, would be my personal advice.
Yeah, and I heard you say there, it would almost have to be Summit Hill and Summit University having a conversation, right? Because it's the north and south sides of Summit Hill or Summit Avenue.
Right.
Whew, more work, but good work. Thanks, Mary Karen. Monica, what else do we have?
Megan would like to know, can you speak to balancing being bike friendly and friendly to people with mobility disabilities like me?
Yeah, I mean, we're not, right? or we try. We start from a place of positive intent. I mean, and there's and then I would say, I mean, I would add to that too, pedestrian friendly. I mean, and how are we acknowledging each of those together and separate, and then respecting the needs of other modes of transit as well. And the city has done yeoman's work on a citywide bike plan and on a citywide pedestrian plan. To your point, Megan, I don't know. I'm guessing not, that there's not a plan for people with mobility needs. I would hope that that's addressed primarily in the pedestrian plan. But what I'll say is, it's great to have good plans, but we as residents have to support the city in investing in those plans and calling on those being prioritized, because the I think about, is it in the pedestrian plan or a totally different one, to just add sidewalks? It's a shocking amount of mileage within the city that we don't have sidewalks, and but to pay for that, we have to support that being a priority budget item, and so that's what I would say. Like, we do always need to do better on recognizing our mobility across modes, and we have to want those to be priorities and then hold our city accountable to fulfilling those priorities, and then making sure they're being fulfilled equitably, like that map I showed where resources are less than others. So making sure we're not just upgrading, no offense team, but the bike path on Summit, but that we are adding and improving on bike paths on the north end and on the west side, where they don't have them.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Looks like we got more questions, Monica.
Yep. David Kratz, in reviewing and approving neighborhood plans, how often do plans not align with the city's 2040 plan? Do you have any examples of any neighborhood policies that have been removed from drafts?
Great question. I don't have an answer to the latter part. With where I sit on Planning Commission, I would see what was being moved forward for like a final approval. And the 2040 plan was really just finished pretty recently. And so arguably Summit Hills could be an early one to push up against some of those things. And that's where you really want to work with city staff on where do things align or not, and if needed, making an argument to amend the city plan. I mean, it's which would totally be something that the neighborhood could approach doing, but I haven't experienced it getting to that point, I guess. So really good question. I think using the citywide plan as a guide or as to vet things out or to make sure you're not missing things is super smart. But then also having it be your own plan because it is your neighborhood is important.
So it sounds like it's more of it's almost like a conversation in these plans in a way.
Yeah. Well, and then the neighborhood plan is supposed to inform city plans, so that it's really coming from the local to the citywide.
Yeah. Hey, Monica, do we have more questions yet, or do you have a question for Wendy too, like ones that you're hearing from the community?
Yeah, something that some of these big projects can become very controversial. Because everybody's got their own vision of what they think is best for their neighborhood. How does the Planning Commission handle that emotion part of it?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and because and sometimes things are personal. I mean, if you live really close to it, or or it's something you've been working on a long time, yeah, it's hard for it to not be personal. I mean, we're humans and we're doing this work because we love our city, right? So, but I think when an issue is before, because it will start before a committee, and that would, and especially if it's a bigger project, that's most likely going to be zoning or comprehensive planning. And the staff prepare a lot of information to help the commissioners be as informed as possible, but also able to ask questions and to really seek to understand, but so they feel as informed as they can. And if they're not ready, then they can pause and say, we need more time with this, and we need to discuss it more. And then the decisions before the commission members, either committee and the full board, at the end of the day, are within parameters of its role. Like what that you are addressing. Does this meet the current zoning ordinances? Is this variance acceptable given all these other factors? Stuff like that. Like at the end of the day, there are parameters, and that we are recommending up or down within. And I'm not going to say that every planning commissioner every time stays within those, myself included. If there's just a prod, it just, but that's what you're called to do. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I have a personal question that I'm going to use my point of privilege. It's occurred to me since, paying attention to the affordable housing questions that are swirling in St. Paul right now. I know that one of the ways we talk about affordability is AMI, area median income.
Oh my gosh.
And a lot of activists being frustrated that is kind of county-wide as opposed to neighborhood specific. Have you heard of any efforts to in the inclusionary zoning realm to kind of define that AMI a little differently? Is that even possible?
Oh yeah, I love that question for lots of reasons, because I wish we didn't even call it AMI. Because I'm like, what is that? And the time it takes a new person to learn it, like they've moved on. It's just, and it's not human, like how someone provides for their family or their own health and safety, like should be humanized, I think, and the role housing plays in that. That being said, what's really so incredibly frustrating about housing in general is that for so long it was only financially supported and directed by the federal government, by HUD, and HUD makes the rules, and being a federal agency, having to keep things more linear to keep things manageable. I mean, but our St. Paul's HUD allocations, base allocations haven't changed since the 80s. If I remember my most recent update at Planning Commission, I mean, it's awful. Now in the last few years, we have all witnessed, gratefully, the city and county calling out their role and responsibility in housing and homelessness. I think they would say that their recognition of their personal responsibilities from where they sit has really changed a lot in the very recent years, and I am super grateful for that. Ramsey County has approved for their Housing and Redevelopment Authority, they have approved a levy, and so they're going to levy for housing and redevelopment. That's starting in 2022. Hennepin County has a $250 million 10-year plan to better address housing and homelessness, and they're going to fund that through their hope is for a local option sales tax that they need approved by the legislature. So both counties saying we do have a responsibility and we are going to raise the funds to adequately pay for it is huge, and it's a total game changer for us in really positive ways. So I don't wish we could call it, and so how we address what is affordable and deeply affordable, like I can't stand any of that language because that doesn't actually explain it to someone who isn't in that situation and who maybe never has been or doesn't feel at risk of it. It's not the right type of comparison, and I don't know exactly what is, but I will say talking about it and using these types of forums and talking about it at the dinner table and with friends, and reading the extra news articles about it and looking for it in our elected officials, all of that is really worthwhile, and it's making a difference.
Yeah. And earlier you talked about the mayor has the authority to start something like an inclusionary zoning study. Would that be an opportunity for folks interested in affordable housing issues to get involved?
Well, that kind of study would probably be largely staff driven, but then I would hope that there would be community engagement opportunities to learn more. So, that staff would come to Summit Hills District Council or would have, a public sessions to talk about and learn more. Just like, I mean, they're doing it big citywide ones right now with the parking studies, that they've. So I would really hope that they would do the same on inclusionary zoning as a way to educate. I would say the mayor and Ramsey County both also have offices or team members specifically dedicated to housing now that they didn't have before. And so those offices, I mean, I think would also be actively doing community engagement. That's how the SAFE ordinance really came together in St. Paul, was the mayor's office having a number of roundtables of all kinds of groups. I went to a couple of them for both personal and professional reasons, and out of that, those many workshops came parts of, if not all of, the SAFE ordinance that passed in this last year.
Got it. Cool. Monica, anything further that you'd like to ask?
No, I think we've covered a wide range.
Awesome. Well, something we do every show is honor our local nonprofit community by sharing organizations our listeners can contribute to as they're able. Since Wendy works for an amazing nonprofit, Wendy, could you share more about Catholic Charities and what it does?
Yeah, when you told me I could speak about something, I was like, really? Like, can I talk about my own thing? So, yeah, I mean, thank you so much, and particularly this conversation about addressing our housing challenges in St. Paul, and it's something that district councils can and do and should play a role in. I would just Catholic Charities of St. Paul and Minneapolis serves over 23,000 families, children, and adults across Minneapolis, St. Paul every single year. And we do that through providing emergency shelter, permanent supportive housing. We have close to 1,000 apartments with residents across Minneapolis and St. Paul who had at one time experienced homelessness and are now living in stability. And then we also have incredible children's programs and more. And I'm very fortunate to support their advocacy and public engagement work. But I would ask that when people do drive by Dorothy Day Place, that they pause and think about it and recognize it as a very important part in our community's social safety net, and that it's real people who are living, working, trying to stay healthy from COVID, and who have had experiences that brought them to us and for us to support and into their future. And that for us, just that home is more than four walls and a roof. It's the people, it's the care, it's memories that make home into a life and that really anchor us in the community around us. It's also the solid ground on which we find our footing and put our roots down to grow, just like my first tiny apartment at 696. And that we have really been deeply reminded in this last year of just how powerful home is, when many of us were asked to stay at home for the safety of others. And yet our staff at Catholic Charities continue to show up every single day to ensure those that we serve did get food safely, did get shelter safely, get services safely. Our single adult programs, I'm very, very proud to say we've experienced only a 1% positive rate for COVID over the last year,
Holy cow.
which is unbelievable. And it just really speaks to the hard work and how good the teams are at doing it. And so I would say we know that the impacts of the pandemic are going to be long and unforeseen for us, and that there's going to be more people at risk of experiencing homelessness and housing instability in St. Paul at a time when home has never been more important. And so what we're actually asking folks to do, of course, donations at cctwincities.org are always welcome and greatly valued. But right now, too, we're asking supporters to actually just text home to 50457. Have a petition going to really drive on the power of home and how critically important it is for our local and state partners to be investing and continuing their efforts and just continuing to raise awareness on how important home is. So
awesome.
That would be my ask.
I wonder, Monica, can we put that in chat? Texting 50, can you say that again?
50457. You just text home to that number.
Text home. And then if we don't get it now, we'll get it later for all of you who are watching. That's a great ask. Thank you so much. Wendy, anything else you'd like to share with our viewers about the Planning Commission or plans or anything?
Well, I probably should have said it at the beginning. Like, this is just me and myself. Like, this is, these are my opinions from my own experience, and are not speaking on behalf of the city or the Planning Commission. but I super appreciate the opportunity to share my enthusiasm and just deep belief in this work.
Awesome. Well, everybody, we have come to the end of our another learning journey here at Summit Hills Community Thinkers. Please do share this show on Facebook and like our page to keep up with more content. And Monica's going to tell you what's coming up next.
Yeah, next Friday at 11 a.m., we'll be talking about business improvement districts with Joe Spencer and Emma Burns, the president and project manager of the St. Paul Downtown Alliance. So that'll be a great conversation. Also, please plan to attend our April 22nd online meeting, where we are going to share what we've learned from our outreach to the neighborhood. That's April 22nd at 7 p.m. Mark your calendars. If you need more information, it is on our webpage.
And you do need to register for this event, so please check it out. There's an event on Facebook and on Nextdoor. So thanks again, Wendy, and thanks again to all who watched us. Have a great day.